Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Chidi's Soapbox. This week I'm discussing the OPT process, which is the optional practical training for international students after graduation. I know it was a really confusing time for me, and I think many people can benefit from learning about the process way ahead of time instead of when you're already in the thick of it. And so I hope this is helpful for you if you're going to go through the process at some point, and I hope we can learn a lot today. So the optional practical training, or the OPT, is kind of thought about as an extension period on your student visa for F1 students that allows students to work. Now, students get varying amounts of time to work in something that's directly related to their major, depending on where they fall under different eligibility requirements. So generally, there are 4 ways that you could be participating in the OPT, or 4 types of OPT allowances that are generally given to students. First off, there's a pre-completion OPT. Now, this can be applied for once you've completed at least 1 year of university in the US. You could have been under your F1 status or a different status. And this generally means that if you've taken time for a pre-completion OPT, it is actually taken out from your post-completion OPT, which is the time that you could work after you graduate. This is, of course, used for something like an internship or a co-op, and it's probably less advisable to do a pre-completion OPT versus doing a CPT for an internship, because even though the CPT definitely says you have to work part-time, it's just that the OPT takes away from your time that you can work outside of graduation, for example. If you are given an allowance for a pre-completion OPT, you're allowed to work up to 20 hours a week in like a major-related internship kind of thing, and you're allowed to work full-time if school is not in session. So those are kind of the balances that you can make with a pre-completion OPT. Then there's the more popular post-completion OPT, which is what I'm going to be speaking about for the most of this video. But the post-completion OPT is what you apply for at the end of your program end date. So you're applying to it in like your last semester, just approaching graduation. And you can apply to it without having a definite job offer already given. You don't need to do that first. You can get the OPT and then apply to jobs, because they do give some time for you to job search and do all of that after graduation. As I mentioned, in comparison to the pre-completion OPT, for the post-completion OPT, you could have some time taken off for that if you've used time for a pre-completion OPT. So for example, if you had internships or co-ops throughout your time in college and you spent like 10 months, you could have your 12 months of post-completion OPT cut down to essentially 2 months if you've used that time up, because USCIS balances that time for you. And normally it should be a full 12 months that you're given. Of course, with the post-completion OPT, you should be employed in a field that's very directly related to your major. You have to demonstrate that, and you have to give updates from time to time to show that the tasks that you are engaged in are relevant to your course of study that you were in university for. And you also have to be full-time as well. The STEM OPT is the longest kind of OPT that I'm speaking about today. It's generally something that you can apply for after you've completed your 12 months of your regular OPT, your post-completion OPT. And this gives you 24 months beyond that 12 months. And so essentially, after graduation as a STEM student in designated degrees and things like that, you are essentially given as much as 36 months or 3 years to work after graduation. So this has to do with if your employer is registered under E-Verify, and if USCIS designates your degree as one of the STEM field degrees. They have very particular criteria about them, and so you can find out more about that on their website for sure. One kind that's not very well known is what they call a cap gap OPT extension. So that's usually occurs, and you can apply for that if you have an employer that has applied for a H-1B work visa on your behalf, and your F1 OPT time is going to expire before you're going to be able to switch over to your H-1B visa. And so this cap gap extension allows you to still remain covered under all the status from USCIS until your H1 visa can kick in and you have a whole new status. And so this is really dependent on your employer applying for that. And it kind of comes up in an uncomfortable time when one status is ending, but the next one hasn't picked up yet. So this is something that you can use to cover that time and remain completely covered under the law. So now we're going to get into the real nitty-gritty of the process. And so for applying to the OPT, this is kind of a timeline that you can take to apply to it all the way through from the first step up to after graduation and employment. So the first thing that you have to do is each university or each college has their own process for requesting the designated school official to begin the process to recommend you for an OPT. This is the first step, and it kind of has to take place around 100 to like 120 days before graduation. And so to put that into like a proper context, if you are going to graduate in May, if you're a spring graduate, like 120 days is like 4 months. So we're looking at somewhere around January, February that you're already considering this, making yourself familiar with the process and finding out from your school what steps they need to recommend you for the OPT. And this is like the very first step of it. It has to be done quite early because of all the subsequent steps that are going to come after that. I recommended the 100 to 120 days before graduation because of this next step, which is your school actually doing the process of recommending your OPT. And this is really varied depending on the school size, how fast they work, how many people are really requesting it at that point. And so with this process, the school is going through your eligibility. They are creating a new I-20 form for you and signing that, and then doing some paperwork in the CVIS portal on your behalf. So these are a few things that they have to do on their end that there isn't a definite time for because it depends on how they work. And so giving yourself that 120 days before means that they can eat up some time and you're still not in too much of a dilemma based on graduation and that time approaching. The next step is pretty vital and is really a student-led point in the process. And this is where you've gotten all that feedback back from your designated school official. They've given you your new I-20 and they've told you to go ahead and take on a part of this process. And so at this point, you will be filing your I-765, which is your application for employment authorization. This is a specific form that comes from USCIS. You'll find it on their website. It's very common. And in this time, you have to do this within about 30 days from the time that your school official has completed that process with the I-20 and told you to go ahead. So this is the next 30 days again. So in this time, you have to gather some documents just for this process. For this point in the process, you're also bound by another time requirement where you're able to apply as far out as 90 days from your graduation. So now we've gone from 4 months to 3 months now. So 3 months before your graduation, you are allowed to send in the I-765 and get this very important part of the process rolling. If you're quite late on it, you still have up to 60 days beyond your graduation to apply for the OPT and still be covered by all the laws at that point. So what paperwork exactly do you need to submit at this point? Of course, I mentioned the I-765 itself, which is the main form. Along with this, you have to sign your new I-20 that had just been granted to you by your school official. You have to send in 2 passport photographs, which are 2.5 inches by 2.5. That's about 50 millimeters, but that's the USCIS recommended size. You have to send your I-94, which is the form that you get upon entry into the US. It marks your last entry into the US. You can always find it online and print it out at any point with your details. Of course, you need things like your passport page, identification in that sense, probably your visa, your F1 visa scan as well. So these are a few things that you need. I've put a link to the websites that lists all these requirements that you have to send in as well. You should know as well at this point, you need to send in an application fee for the OPT. Right now it is at $410, and you have to pay this by either money order or cashier's check, and not by cash or not by any online payment right now. This is also the same process you're going through if you are at the end of your post-completion OPT of 1 year and you're applying for your STEM OPT. And so in this case, you would also be sending in a copy of your EAD card, which is your identification card that you get when you are given your OPT allowance. At this point, it's out of your hands. If you've done everything you're supposed to do, you've sent it into USCIS. Now you'll receive a receipt notice, which kind of tells you from USCIS, like, yes, we got all your stuff and we are now processing everything before giving you your OPT authorization in the form of the EAD card. The EAD card is essentially your ID at this point. It's like a whole new visa, really. But that gives you authorization to work. You would have to show that to employers or anything else. And so usually you're able to check the status of your case on the USCIS website. You put in your identification numbers and your name, and you're able to see the status of your application. So considering the fact that you sent this in maybe 2 months before you graduate, 1 month before you graduate, it often takes somewhere like 2, 3, 4 months to get this done, just because you have so many people applying for it. And so I know for me personally, I applied pretty late in April, almost May. So I got it in early July in that year. And so in this time, you are just waiting on it and checking on USCIS to see the status of what they're doing with the application. Next, if you do get it, you're approved, everything is great, you get the EAD card in the mail. This identifies a certain point or certain dates that you are approved to work. If you already have a job offer that's solid, then you can begin before that authorized date on the card. And so you'll probably be working through all of this with your employer and keeping them up to date for it. But at this point, you get your EAD card and you are clear to start work if you have that. After this, you are still kind of under the process, you're still kind of under the guidance of your university, and you have to keep some information up to date. So you often have to submit a report at 6, 12 months to report what you're working on at your job, to keep up information about your employer and about yourself, like addresses and phone numbers. And you fill a form that points out how your daily activities line up with what your major was while you were in university. And so this is one small thing that you have to keep on doing while you are on your OPT, and you have to report your progress in this form. The OPT process can be really stressful, but I hope with these few details, I can make it a bit easier for you. In the description to this video, you can find a few links to USCIS websites and different recommendations to make sure that you have all your documents checked properly and you don't miss anything when you go through this application. Of course, the best thing to do in this time is just be patient, but also be prepared and be timely in doing things kind of really early, just so you're not in a difficult position closer to graduation. I would say I waited a bit too long for some things, and even the money and the fees for it was a bit of a deterrent at that point. But if you're able to make sure to do things as early as you can, just so you are covered and you don't need to worry too much. If there are things that happen during your OPC process, let me know. Or if you have questions about the process in general or any special conditions, feel free to comment and keep the conversation going. Thank you for watching, and I hope this is helpful, and I hope you can use the links as well to check all your documents in time and get things done. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time on Chidi Soapbox.